Again, we want to thank all of our sponsors for this conference. We thank you for being here. We're just about to start. All right, let's begin. It's exciting to have you here. If you are still stuck in the video screen, just slide the toggle at the bottom of the video box, slide it to the left to get back to the panel view. It's my pleasure to welcome Erica Smiley, the Jobs of Justice Executive Director, who's going to begin our plenary session today, as goes the South. Smiley?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone who made it to join us at 3 o'clock or whatever time it is where you are on a Friday. We're in a moment where we need to both study our past and study our history while simultaneously reimagining our future together. And so for that reason, it felt really important to have one of our younger network leaders open the session with a lesson from our past. Naeem Faulkner has been teaching me about justice ever since he could talk. A young, brilliant Black boy growing up in Atlanta and now Philadelphia, he embodies everything we have to win and all we must consider when crafting our campaigns together. He will open this next discussion by grounding us in one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s lesser-known speeches, a deep cut, if you will. So please give your attention over to Naeem.
Hi, my name is Naeem Faulkner. I'm in 8th grade. I'm an artist, and my connection to J with J are my parents, my late father, Cheston Davis Faulkner, who is a good friend of Smiley, and my mother was a workers' justice activist, and my mother's name is Cherie Davis, as some people have already seen her. But yeah, I am here today to read a short excerpt from a presentation Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made while traveling throughout the rural South in 1968. He was on a listening tour to hear the stories of poor Black communities to generate support for the Poor People's Campaign, and he was killed shortly afterwards. At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres and land in the West and Midwest to its white peasants from Europe, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the Black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check. In my own voice, I would like to say that the future is bright, but there's no need to wait. There's plenty of money, and it's ours. I also believe that we need equality. Equality is a thing that, we must have, and it's not just something that we need to see in papers or in laws. It needs to be real, and we need to fight for that now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Naeem. I just want to pause and let's sit with that. That was well said, and your remarks at the end as well. So I'm just going to be silent for a moment so we can all take in what you just said. All right. Thanks again, Naeem. We really appreciate and honor the words that you just shared from Dr. King. Again, not necessarily the most popular and publicly known speech, but really important when it comes to a discussion of the relationship between democracy and economic sustainability and between worker power and racial justice. So we really thank you for that. And with that, we'd like to fast forward to the present to hear reflections from a modern day trailblazer, Ken Rigmaiden, who is the General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. President Rigmaiden began his career with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades upon graduating from California State University in San Jose in 1977. He immediately enrolled in the floor covering apprenticeship training program of Local 1288, and for 6 years remained in San Jose as a floor covering installer. moving his way into the role as president of Local Union 1288 or 1288. He served various leadership roles for the union in California and eventually for the International Union, and in 2002, Mr. Rigmaiden was elevated to the position of Executive General Vice President for the union. In March 2013, he was unanimously appointed General President by the General Executive Board and was later elected to the position at the 2014 IAPAT General Convention. Among many other roles, Ken is a member of our Jobs with Justice Board and has been a dedicated and fierce partner in advocating for more diversity in the building trades. Please give your attention to Ken now.
As we grapple with the new reality brought on by the COVID-19 virus, working people across our country, and in particular in the South, are fighting once again not to be left behind. But before going any further, I'd like for us to take a moment of silence for the IUPAT members that we've lost to COVID-19. Kilder Diaz, Roy Tabios, Victor Torres, Luciano Gomez, Fernando Gallego, Jose Vasquez Herrera, Travis Graham, Walter Stevens, Bob J. Russo, Elio Vanderputten, and Richard McCardo. Thank you very much. Now, my story is like so many Black Americans in this country, begins in the South. In 1944, my mother walked into a downtown Lake Charles, Louisiana department store looking for her first real job. She had just recently graduated from high school and was ready to take on the world. Her dream was to go to Southern University, but in the meantime, she needed a good job. After a brief interview, my mother got the job. She would be a store runner, delivering orders between the stockroom and the various departments. She was so excited for this new opportunity, and it felt like this was just the beginning of what was to come. Then she met her future boss, a former neighbor, a white woman who dropped out of school and never graduated. My mother ran out of that department store crying and decided immediately that she was going to California. Even with more education than her white neighbor, the fact that this woman was going to be her boss was too much for my mother to bear. It became painfully clear her options were few and far between in Louisiana. She needed to go where she could have a real opportunity to not only survive, but thrive. It's been 76 years since my mother left Lake Charles, Louisiana, and we're still fighting for those real opportunities. Now, COVID-19 has laid bare a truth so many working people across our country already knew. Our economy is broken. In 2017, the IUPAT and others commissioned a report titled Build a Better South to better document conditions in the construction industry during this massive boom. The report focused on 6 major cities: Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Houston, Miami, and Nashville. These cities are the engines of growth for the South and some of the largest construction markets in the United States. Even in 2013, nearly 1 million construction workers were employed in these 6 cities, accounting for 43% of all construction workers in those 5 states. More than 1 in 4 construction workers employed in the South are located in one of these 6 cities, and nationally, 1 in 10 workers labor in these 6 cities. Now, even before this global pandemic, construction workers faced a bleak reality in these cities. 1 in 7 workers had been injured during their construction career, and more than 1 in 3 of these workers had suffered an injury in the previous 12 months at the time this report was published. Just 5% of those injured had workers' compensation insurance to cover the cost of their injuries. Less than half of those workers surveyed earned less than $15 an hour, and 1 in 10 of these workers experienced wage theft at some point in their construction career, and only 23% had been able to get back their stolen wages. In addition, fear of deportation, sexual harassment, of being blacklisted, and the lack of real labor policy and enforcement threats often kept workers from speaking up. With almost half of all construction workers in the South located in these cities facing real threats to their lives and livelihood, this report was an eye-opener for a call to action by the IUPAT. Now, the future of our union is not where we have market share and power, but where we have nothing. This is especially true in our current reality. If we were to hold the line for working families in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, who have been hit hard by COVID-19, we have to make sure that during the recovery, developers and contractors cannot come to Atlanta and Miami to do whatever they want to turn a profit. During this pandemic, construction workers have been deemed essential and have continued working in many cities across the country. Still, 50% of job sites have shut down, resulting in 49,000 of IUPAT members losing their jobs, and with it, many of their benefits. This has meant that while members in New York City are able to take the proper precautions while working, many members and workers across Florida are still waiting for their first unemployment check while wrestling with returning to a potentially unsafe job site. Our fight at this very moment is to make sure that our members and other essential workers survive not only this crisis, but life in a COVID-19 world. This month, we launched a national petition demanding that OSHA establish clear guidance and protocols for the construction industry. This is to ensure that workers in our industry are as safe as possible while working to provide for their families. As of March, we've lost 11 members to this virus. The IUPAT does not want to lose one more member. We also continue to fight for a people's bailout through Congress, demanding for pension and health care reform, real investment in infrastructure, increased health and safety standards through increased OSHA oversight and enforcement. This includes securing basic PPE and protecting workers who speak out about unsafe working conditions. This fight isn't just in Washington, D.C. It also includes continuing to educate and organize construction workers across the country, especially in the South. In Nashville, workers and community partners are still pushing general contractor Skanska to step up and commit to using responsible contractors on all of their projects. In Houston, subcontractor Milam and Company continues their dismal track record of putting profit over the health and safety of their employees. Now, even during this pandemic, the workers have taken collective action to demand better. Using digital tools to engage union and non-union workers alike. We are a union that fights for all working people, and we will reach them any and every way we can. We continue to develop and strengthen relationships with community partners that share our collective vision of a better future for working people. Yeah, COVID-19 has further exposed the long-standing racist, anti-worker policies and structures that forced my mother and millions of other Black Americans to flee the South. While being the testing ground of oppression and abuse, the South has been much more powerful as the innovator of resistance and freedom that has spread across this country. As working people across our nation stare down an uncertain future, we still look to the South as an incubator and an innovator for resistance and freedom.
Wow, thank you for that. And we're so excited that we get to work and partner with President Rigmaiden and really get to understand the role of the South, not only as a place where things are still backwards, but actually as an innovator and a place to understand how we might incubate new strategies. I think that can't be understated, that the place where we've had the least protections over the last 100 years, where the New Deal didn't necessarily serve the best interests of the majority of people, let alone Black people in the South, that people fighting under these conditions actually have the most to teach us in this moment. And perhaps that these strategies that are coming out of the Southern region are useful not only for Southerners, but for everyone to be thinking about. So we're really excited to introduce our new Southern School of Thought in this panel, and I really want to kick off a discussion among Southern leaders, starting with one of the fiercest Central Labor Council presidents of our era. Banda McDaniel joined the United Steelworkers in 1992 at the Bridgestone Tire Plant in Laverne, Tennessee. There she began her union journey as a shop steward. Banda was trained in the United Steelworkers Women of Steel Leadership Initiative, going on to train other emerging union sister leaders like herself. After holding various offices in the local, Banda was elected president of the Central Labor Council of Nashville and Middle Tennessee in 2013, where she has worked to connect the local labor movement to grassroots community organizations and build enduring partnerships with faith and community allies. In 2017, Banda was elected as vice president to the AFL-CIO Executive Council, and though I haven't gotten to work as closely with Banda as many others in this conference, I've been a deep admirer from afar and can't wait until this pandemic is over so I can go and hang out in person. So please direct your attention over to Banda.
Thank you, Erica, for that introduction. I so appreciate this panel, President Kenneth Rigmaiden and the IUPAT. Unions like the IUPAT have begun to make investment in places like Nashville, in the labor movement and organizing. And so that's what it takes in order to build the kind of worker movements that are necessary, especially in these times. So hello, everyone. From Nashville, Tennessee, what is often called the Athens of the South. But often you hear about Nashville as a place that is a city on the rise. But what I can tell you is that poverty rose in Nashville in 2018 to the highest level it has been in a decade. Nashville ranks at the bottom 5.9% of U.S. counties for absolute intergenerational poverty and mobility of its population. There is strong evidence that education and jobs alone are not sufficient in reducing Nashville's deep, multi-generational and neighborhood poverty. And so it is at this moment that the work of the labor movement and grassroots worker power organizations is needed more than ever. We have seen, especially since the beginning of COVID-19, an increase in, we are situated in between two Tyson poultry plants, one of which has 380 positive cases. The other, a union represented plant by RWDSU that has right at 100. We also have restaurant workers and had a one-day walkout strike for Kroger distribution center work. So workers here are agitating and organizing, and the labor movement is revitalized in ways that we haven't seen in my work life. It's very important to have these conversations about investing in the South and why that's important. And so our panel is a very distinguished one. They gave me their bios, but I think it's important for you to hear from them, who they are and what their stories are. So I'll first call on Dr. Cynthia Hewitt and ask her to give her introductions before we start.
Yes, I think, do I need to just begin? Okay, so I presume I'm online. I will give a brief introductory statement. My name is Cynthia Hewitt, and I am Director of International Comparative Labor Studies at Morehouse College. We started in 2017 to try to reconnect the social justice and civil rights movement and the labor movement, mostly because our younger generation were not receiving the information and the awareness of how vital these two movements have been to each other throughout history. It's also very fundamental to everything that we do when we speak about social justice or ending inequality, or even whenever we speak about Black, African, minority, and other marginalized communities by gender, etc. What we're really talking about are the people who are working for a living. We're not talking about the upper 10%. We're talking about the working 80%. So I think what we recognize is that the touchstone to make sure that the scholarship and the theory and educational materials that come out of Morehouse and other HBCUs is the connection to the unions and to the working class. So I'm particularly thankful in this period of COVID, where we have unprecedented upheaval, chaos that might make for opportunity, to have young scholars and dedicated labor activist scholars come together in LRAN and commit to doing the research that will allow us to see clearly how we could step forward. More than ever, we need this research to be done. Let's see. I want to.
And so at this point, I'd like to introduce Ursula. Ursula Price is a talented organizer and very respected in the South. And so I'd also like her to introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Banda. Yes, my name is Ursula Price. I am the director of the New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice. We are a grassroots organizing group that has been in New Orleans since Hurricane Katrina. And it's very ironic that we were born out of a moment of disaster capitalism, and we're here with you today to talk about a similar moment. We specifically work to bring together Black and Latinx workers who have been pitted against one another in the labor market. And so a big part of our theory of change is building bridges and uniting those that capitalism would divide. Would you, do I go into my whole thing, or am I just introducing myself?
So I'd like to ask you a question. So how are you organizing during the crisis? And, what are some of the top line things that you are seeing in your organizing right now?
Yes. So, as I said, well, let me back up and point out the obvious. New Orleans is a chocolate city, right? That's one of the reasons I live here. You can feel it here in the streets and the music and the food. This is a city of African American people, and that is part of why we are one of the most hardest hit cities in the nation when it comes to COVID-19. For us, that's not just about health disparities, although there are plenty in our community. It's about an economic crisis and a crisis of capitalism. That's what I was saying. We've already experienced what capital does after a disaster during Hurricane Katrina. And right now, what we are seeing is a move away from disaster capitalism to corona capitalism. It's already like exacerbating the negative impacts of racial disparity, right? So our already underpaid, unsafe jobs are even more so, and we're being threatened with losing them if we complain. The informal economy that keeps most of us afloat is still criminalized, but now it's also invisible when it comes to economic support or protections for those workers. The system that's relied on our incarceration to fund itself still targets us, but even more so, and now they use the narrative that we're the cause of a health crisis to do it. And all the old strategies to pit workers against each other are still in full force. You know, black versus immigrant. And even more recently, our sanitation workers have gone, some sanitation workers have gone on strike. They are striking against a black-owned sanitation company. And so now we see the black middle class, or, you know, class that hopes to become middle class, being pitted against the working class, when in reality, this falls at the feet of the government, right? All those things, very familiar. And then on top of that, you know, capitalism is taking advantage of the moment. Capitalism is already adapting. So at the worker level, that means a lot more pain and hardship. That means corporations are consolidating to make sure that they stay alive and solvent, while the jobs shrink and the conditions get worse. We're already seeing that everyone might remember that the Hard Rock Hotel collapsed here and killed a bunch of workers. What you might not have noticed is that during this COVID crisis, they finally admitted that there was gross negligence on the part of the general contractor, and that the penalty for that is about $100,000 in fines for 3 people's lives. Meanwhile, a key witness in exposing what was going on there, Delmer Joel Ramirez Palma, has been deported back to a country where he faces threats on his life. And as I've already said, our sanitation workers are being forced to work without protective equipment, hazard pay, or even the basic dignity of being able to ask for sick leave when they need it. So for us, the conditions for workers are bad, and they're just going to get worse. But it's also an important moment for our organizing. As I said, those sanitation workers, without the support of any organization, got themselves together and walked out. It has been terrible to be a sanitation worker in New Orleans for decades, but this is the moment where they decided to say no more. It's an exciting moment, right? And it's up to us to stand with them. As far as we're concerned, this is the moment where we've got to be very focused on unity against the what we know is coming from capitalism. It's going to be really hard to do because capitalism is really good at convincing us that we're each other's problem.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit on a lot of things in what you said, Ursula, around, you know, it harkens back to the sanitation strikes here in Tennessee. You know, you would think that we had come a long way, but some of the same struggles that we started out with the framing in terms of what Dr. King talked about, in terms of the economic fight for workers, that it remains the same. It remains the same. The sanitation workers in Memphis are still, you know, fighting for public financing of their pension plan, which is happening in all of the cities across the South and across the country. But I really appreciate your comments and thoughts around that. Dr. Hewitt, could you talk a little bit about the economic landscape and some of the things that you are seeing in this moment of the COVID crisis, particularly for Black and brown workers?
So we have been trying to capture some of the displacement and troubles facing Black workers both in the United States and globally. And I think that the first thing that we saw was that with the move towards lockdown, sheltering in place, there was a complete deficit of consideration of what in place meant for Black and brown workers, both in the U.S. and globally. We had so many reports back from our colleagues in Africa relating to the impossibility of literally feeding themselves because many people, especially in the rural areas and villages, earn their livings day to day. And even in the urban areas, if you've been to any third world country, you know many people are engaged in vending on the streets. So when you lock the streets down, you bring a situation of almost starvation to many communities. Along with that, you lock down movement. Farmers couldn't go to their fields, and that also is a ridiculous. It's a ridiculous application of what is a rule or what can be a rule in a core country, what might be good for the middle class, but it's not good for the informal sector and for the working people. We've seen other economic impacts. We begin a webinar series that we do on Thursdays usually. And one of the things we did was to talk with Dr. Bill Spriggs, chief economist of the AFL-CIO. And his comments particularly stuck with me because what he pointed out is that this is certainly not a time like any other time. And even when it comes to the question of unemployment, for the first time in decades, white male unemployment has reached the double-digit arena, over 10%, that it didn't reach in 2008 and 9, which is a serious recession, and which African American men and women have been suffering for many. We tend to have the double whatever the unemployment rate in white America is where you'll find the unemployment rate in Black America. Well, astoundingly, in some ways, the coronavirus pushed so many people out of work that white men found themselves 4 times more out of work, 400% rise in unemployment among white men, 300% plus rise among white women, and then a close to a 200% rise among African Americans. So for the first time, as he showed on a graph, the unemployment rates begin to somewhat converge. And as of now, it was reported that Black unemployment is 1.3 times white unemployment, the ratio of Black unemployment to white unemployment. So we're seeing some remarkably different things, and it also kind of highlights the danger in something in the stage we're in, because if that triggers I'll fight, and we've seen the guns come out around America, if that triggers a core white patriarchal response of using violence to solve things, going to war to solve things, we have to be vigilant for such a situation. On the other hand, to some extent, we also recognize that people don't see that, in fact, we working people are all together in this. There's some lights, you see some points of where that understanding has come through. The 99% movement, for instance, and some of the Our Revolution and other types of movements. There's a certain awareness that we're in the same bucket, but at the same time, I think it's a cultural question. And when you talk about bringing theory out of the South, the approach in the South is a African-centered approach to the extent that it's a peace approach. We started out with a quote by Reverend Martin Luther King, and we can segue from there to looking at the anti-war stances of Coretta Scott King and the general. And today, when we talk about surviving coronavirus, too often I hear on the media we're at war, we're in a state of war. But if you check out our communities, we're in a state of love. We understand that it is a love mission to get through corona with each other. So it's a whole different mindset. Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I'm going to just jump in quickly because Vanda, we're being told there's some sound issues on your end. You're coming through real scratchy. So while Vanda figures out her sound, I'll just kind of keep the conversation going, and hopefully we can have her jump back in. I'm actually curious. I want to bring Dr. Kelly in too. He's going to speak a little later. But since we have a little bit of discussion time and some Q&A, I just want to make sure that we introduce him so everyone knows who else is on the screen here. So everyone knows Dr. Everett Kelly is the National President of the American Federation of Government Employees, which is the largest union representing federal and DC government employees. He assumed the presidency in February 2020. Dr. Kelly has been a member of AFG since 1981. He worked at the Anniston Army Depot, which he recently retired from after 30 years. And prior to his election as National Vice President, he served as President of Local 1945 from 2002 to 2011. Welcome, President Kelly. And so I just wanted to check in with Dr. Hewitt and with Ursula, and hopefully when Banda comes back as well, we can hear from her. But we like to talk a little bit about how the political economy of the South is backwards. Cynthia, you talked a little bit about the shift to vigilantism and kind of violence from those who still believe in layers of white supremacy. At the same time, we also like to imply that some of the best strategies for the rest of the country could come out of the region. The old adage, as goes the South, as goes the country. We've certainly seen that on the right. I'm curious if you all are seeing that from the perspective of workers and from organizing, and if so, what are some of those experiments that we should be paying most attention to, or those campaigns that we should be paying most attention to?
I feel like I should defer to Ursula on this one.
Yeah, maybe Ursula and President Kelly, if you have thoughts as well.
Well,
Go ahead, Ursula.
I will just say, first of all, I think that that quote comes from Frederick Douglass, if I'm not mistaken. And I think what the brother meant was that we are emblematic of the worst of America. And if we can make it happen here, then definitely everyone else will be okay. I think it's related to intersectional analysis that says that if you lift up Black women specifically, then you're going to catch the rights of everyone else, right? So that's, first of all, we are not just because we are the South, but because of who is in the South. I think we're representative of that intersectional analysis. And second of all, I think that we have the best opportunity to overcome racial and class divides. This is just my opinion. It's not the worker centers, but in my experience of growing up in Mississippi and going to school in Chicago, I only met white people who had never met a Black person before in Chicago. I think that down here we have to live with each other, and that gives us an opportunity to work it out. As far as experiments that I think we should be paying attention to, I am really excited about the work we are trying to do of talking about issues of detention and immigration in the same context as criminalization and prison, as one of those opportunities to bring together two populations around the same issue, even though the targets aren't exactly the same. And I am excited to see what the sanitation workers are able to accomplish here, because what they have is a movement that could potentially connect with other people. Their ultimate problem is the invention of privatization and subcontracting on city contracts, right? And there are a lot of sectors that are dealing with that, not just sanitation. And so I look forward to seeing what happens when they start building some alliances there. I will stop with those two examples, and I guess I would just add that the other thing I think the South does well is work with the faith community. And a conversation I just had with a friend today was that, we know conditions are about to get worse. And I think that also means that there's going to be a greater focus on like service provision and aid, and that our churches are going to grow in strength as the traditional providers of those kinds of things, and that our relationships with them are going to be very important. But I came here to learn as much as talk.
No, it's all good. Thank you, Ursula. I appreciate that. And just to hear a little bit from the perspective of AFSCME and President Kelly, I mean, federal government employees have been right to work. It's not just in the southern region, but around the country. I mean, how are you all thinking about what it looks like to organize and collectively bargain in the region, both based on kind of the current framework, but also, imagining what's possible in the coming century?
Okay, thank you. First of all, Erica, good to see you again. Banda, Dr. Hewitt, all of you. I mean, it's just good to be here. First of all, I think that I hope everybody understands the political climate that we're in as far as federal employees. This administration have not did us any favors whatsoever. Matter of fact, they have deliberately came after our union and tried to strip us of our rights and our entitlements as it relates to collective bargaining and those types of things. Therefore, making it a little hard for us, but I must say I am grateful and I am thankful that we have survived this pandemic. Has been another hurdle for us, but we have been very creative in learning how to organize virtually. Okay, we have began to organize, doing virtual lunch and learns, and has begun to become very effective. As the national vice president, previously national vice president, serving in District 5, we grew to be the largest district in the Federation during my tenure. We set milestones within AFGE that have not been touched or matched by anyone at this point. And the reason for that is because we went out every single day looking for an opportunity to grow our union. We looked for an opportunity to organize, and we were very successful in doing so, but it was intentional and it was pointed. You got to learn to plan. I certainly believe this. Anyone that failed to plan to fail. So you plan on organizing, you plan on growing your union, and that's what we've done. That's what we will continue to do, even in the midst of this situation.
No, that's really powerful. Thank you. I had to come off mute there. That's really powerful, President Kelly. And we heard from other unions, particularly public sector unions in the region after the Janus decision, that some of their most increased membership, some of their biggest growth had been happening in states like Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee in the southern region. So that clearly tells us that there's an interest, a motivating drive that people want to come together, want to be active in a union or work organization like Ursula's in New Orleans, and want to have some voice on the job, want to have some power on the job. So I just want to remind people that we are taking questions. So if you want to put questions into the Q&A section of Glisser, we'll be able to open those up in a second. And just to continue with our panel while we wait for some of those to come in, I just want to continue on this question of like, what are some of the innovations coming out of the region, particularly post this COVID-19 moment? I know there have been nurses from South Carolina, particularly Black nurses, speaking out and talking about interventions that they've been making. Black teachers from Georgia. I'm curious if you all have heard of other specific creative interventions that have motivated and galvanized Black workers and Southern workers in general in this moment. And maybe more specifically, have there been opportunities where we've been able to come together with migrant workers and white workers in a way that's different in the past, in a way that helps us overcome white supremacy in a different kind of way.
No, I would just like to say that I think that's so important. We had when we have been doing the Ring the Alarm webinar series, we have been getting participation in areas such as the building trades, which we have been able to work more strongly with. So I think there are some connections, and if I could just digress a little, I would like to just say, I kind of like to throw it back out there that one of the things I think that's coming up is the Advancing Black Strategists initiative, which you, Erica, and JWJ are so much behind us being able to do, or to do in the way that we're able to bring Morehouse into this. I don't know if you have a specific time for talking about it, or I could take a couple of minutes to talk about it.
Please do.
So the Advancing Black Strategists initiative, as I understand it, has developed out of the experience of so many African American, that is to say, organizers, strategists, political theorists, African Americans who are playing every role in mobilizing and developing workers' power, but who faced glass ceilings in actually reaching the decision-making table when it came time to pass out the resources. So what we're really talking about is to have no cap at the end, but to be able not only to influence what's happening on the ground or what's happening, but what's being thought. So Advancing Black Strategists Initiative is about development of new theory. And I think that's really exciting because all of the different movements that are occurring, we need to be able to synthesize the lessons. And I think that, in the coming year, we have been talking with AFSG, with President Kelly, about bringing government workers for workers' education courses. So I think that APSI is going to be very important to that. We've been talking with the Black Men in Unions educational movement, which is heavily UAW out of Detroit. They too would like to come to Atlanta, come to Morehouse, and spend a little time in our Black space and try to come to some theoretical and practical developments. So I think we've been working on this with a number of close supporters, of whom the Black Worker Initiative of the Institute for Policy Studies with Mark Baird is also is an important one. We've been working pretty closely with Dr. Luella Tony Lewis, who is out of, I think I would say 1199 New York, SEIU. So we have a number, and this has been our ability to begin to organize a collective theoretical development has also benefited by a grant from the Ford Foundation, Future of Workers, Mr. Garcia, and that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't had support from IUPAT, because it was IUPAT who provided us with additional funding so that we can do benefits in some level that was necessary. So I think that people have come together, and I hope that Morehouse can provide something of a platform, and that's one thing we're really working on now, is to have a platform so that we know we will no longer be all in the same place when we teach and learn and write as we were in the past. So we need to also be able to benefit from that. So we have, for instance, a visiting professor, an honorary visiting professor position that we're hoping to have in place by the fall. Now you don't have to live in Atlanta to be an honorary visiting professor. So yeah, it opens some possibilities. If you'd like to, we have positions in some other aspects like program or project managers. I don't know that you have to live in Atlanta anymore. So it's
That
exciting.
sounds great. Thank you for sharing some of that, Cynthia. And I want to at least get to a couple of these questions before we transition to hearing from President Kelly more specifically. So let me just open it up and get Jessica back on to share a couple questions from the chat.
What a powerful panel. Thank you. I'm going to just look at the questions right now. Here's the question. What actions can we take against the state government efforts to reopen businesses too soon, which exposes working people for the sake of profits? Want to address that?
Yeah, and maybe actually, can we get one or two more just so we can maximize our time and address them all at once? So we got that first one, so we'll put a pin on that. And is there one other or two others that have enough votes? Oh, she's on mute. Jessica, you're on mute.
Lots of buttons here. It's can you discuss the use of prison labor as a cost-cutting mechanism in a way to pit workers against workers? As also in our chat. And what are some examples of digital organizing during the time of COVID? And then we had some questions about learning more about ASFE and organizing in the South, which we've talked about.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, so we have a couple of questions here. So the use of prisons as a cost-cutting mechanism. What are some examples of that, and how have we organized against it? And like Jessica mentioned as well, what actions can we take against state government efforts to reopen businesses too soon in the region? I think Georgia being one of the big examples there. So let's open it up. It looks like we have Banda coming back too, so hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit from her perspective on some of this as well. So if you have your sound, chime in when you're ready. So yeah, who wants to kick us off? Ursula, Cynthia, Banda?
I can speak briefly to the issue of prison labor because we're already seeing it in our sanitation workers strike. About 33 workers walked out initially, and within days they brought in prison labor from a neighboring state to continue with the trash pickup at wages somewhere around 33 cents an hour. Ironically, they framed it as a public interest decision. The temp company that hires these workers says it prides itself on giving opportunities to formerly incarcerated people, and now they are giving opportunities to incarcerated people, right? And so,
Never heard of such a thing.
it actually worked for them, though, right? It's how they got the contract. And even our mostly black city government hasn't quite gotten the idea that, forgive the language, a shitty job is not a solution, right, to no jobs. And so I expect to see more of this. Now, what I find ironic is that they didn't go to the Louisiana Department of Corrections. They went to an Alabama institution to bring in workers. I'm not sure what that was about, right? But I would like to pat myself on the back and say it is due to the work we've done around prison labor in Louisiana that they knew that wasn't a route they could take. We are already looking at how we can get OSHA inspectors down here because those conditions are even worse for prisoners who are also being transported to work in not necessarily safe ways. And we're wondering if we can, we believe we can get the city government to expressly say that they will not allow their subcontractors to use prison labor. Now, that's an advantage we have of being in a fairly progressive black city with a black government, right? It's going to be an even bigger challenge in the rest of Louisiana.
Thank you. We've got another great question come in as well. Yeah, I just wanted to share this question that came in. It says, what are the strategies and tactics that Southern organizers are getting right that Northern that the North is getting wrong or missing?
Ooh, that's a meaty one.
There we go.
I see you, Banda. Go ahead.
So, thank you for the opportunity. I apologize. I hope you can hear me better this time.
Sounds so much better. We're so glad to hear you. Go ahead.
Well, good deal. So one of the things that we're seeing is innovations around organizing, and especially in the South. Here in Nashville, hospitality is the bread and butter of the city. And in fact, it's a third of the revenue for the state of Tennessee comes from Nashville. And our government opened up as well. The economy began to open up on Monday as well. But what we're seeing is renewed vigor and energy around organizing in the hospitality industry. We had a worker center in Nashville, Workers' Dignity, that had already been doing work in the unorganized space around construction workers and hospitality. And we now have a rock music city that the Central Labor Council has been working in partnership with to organize hospitality workers. We see Dollar General, whose corporate headquarters is here, who low retail is tight, no PPE. Those workers are organizing. And so we're seeing renewed energy around just an interest in union membership, because what workers are seeing is that those are the spaces where the most worker protections are offered.
Vanda, I'm sorry.
No, I'm done. President
Okay.
Kelly?
Yes, how are you, Vanda? Always good
Great.
to see you. If I might just add, I think along with that, we have to continue to educate our Black and Brown people about the importance of being unionized, being organized. Okay, we have to begin to encourage, and I'm going to say this. I think even from the pulpit setting, okay, the necessity of understanding economics, because I think according to the the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Black men that are unionized make 20.3% more than being Black men that are not unionized. And so it's so important that we begin to stress this, and so important we begin to educate our men on this so that they can understand the importance of organizing, okay? And I do think that the church is a powerful place where we have to start to educate, Black men on this issue. I just believe that. I mean, after 31 years of being in the pulpit, and I use that pulpit in many instances to do just that. And I just think that we have to do that from a holistic point of view, and then we'll begin to see a lot of organizing in the South. Okay, I think that we have to do that. So I just wanted to add that in.
No, thank you so much, President Kelly. And with that, why don't we hear some closing remarks from Ursula, Cynthia, and Banda, and then we will pivot over to you for your remarks. Can we start with you, Ursula?
Okay. I wasn't sure. I guess in closing, I would just say that I find this moment to be a really difficult, emotionally and physically taxing moment, but also a really opportune moment to bring our people together around these issues, particularly in the South, where labor has been weakened more than anywhere. And I look forward to working with partners across the nation around these kinds of issues. I guess I would close by saying, reminding everyone that most Black folks are from the South, and that it's important for all of us to come see your grandmama and remember where you came from, because the fight is here. And when you come, I got a plate of red beans for you, but you need to come so we can make this happen.
Thank you, Ursula. I'll be coming for those red beans. Cynthia, do you want to come next?
Yes, and I do appreciate you making those comments, Ursula, because I think that is a little bit about who we are in the South. I think I heard it stated, and I want to repeat it. Our resilience is our brilliance. We talk so much now about sustainability and the sustainable development goals. And in order to be sustainable, you need resilience. So that is what we have. And I think that is the highlighting of our resilience is part of the question of how we'll work in the future. Because you can't just say we're going to get more and more and more. It's not a more mentality anymore. It is a well-being mentality. And I think resilience, and I think is something that we know about in the South. So I hope that'll come through in the theory and ideas that we project.
Thank you, Dr. Hewitt. And Banda, do you want to bring it home?
So one of the things that when we started this conversation, President Rigmaiden talked about the South being an incubator. The South is definitely an incubator, and what we've seen is when there's adequate investment in the South, things go well. And I'll use Texas. I'll lift up Texas as an example. Probably 10 years ago, many of the international unions, philanthropic organizations, they have a vigorous worker center, they have a vigorous movement, and they organized 80,000 people into the union movement in Texas. Where there is investment, there is definitely on the ground movements that can build and thrive and transform worker power in the South. So.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Cynthia, Ursula, Banda, for fighting through the tech issues. We're so glad we got to hear your really valuable and important contributions, and for moderating this panel. And we want to pivot to hear some reflections from President Kelly, who also will help us with our call to action for this plenary. So, President Kelly, I'm going to pass it back to you. President Kelly, just so you know, oh, there we go. All right, we couldn't hear you. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me at all?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. You're good. Yep. Thank you
so much. Okay, again, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being a part of the panel today, and for the committee for inviting me to be a part. I especially enjoyed the visit from Aaron, who I had the opportunity to meet some time ago, and so it's just good to be here. Our union know a little about organizing in the South because we've done it every single day. Okay, we represent federal government workers, people who work at the VA hospitals and military installations and Social Security offices. We represent the scientists and public health experts in Atlanta at the CDC, transportation security officers at the airport who make sure all of us fly safely around the country. They are AFG members as well. So are the OSHA inspectors and EPA scientists and people who make sure the food we eat and the air we breathe are healthy. We represent the meat and poultry inspectors and FEMA employees who respond to emergencies and disasters and now pandemics. The federal government is an open shop, one big right to work situation that forces us to organize constantly. Every FG member is someone who decides to sign his or her name and pay their dues. That's always been the way for AFGE. We've had to earn the trust and support of every member that we've ever signed up. In several southern states, AFG is either the largest or one of the largest unions. In Texas, in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alabama, we're at the top in terms of membership. I myself come from Alabama, born, raised, and educated there. And before I became a national president, I was a regional vice president responsible for Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And in a short time, the short time that I served as the national vice president of the Southern region, better known as District 5, we grew from 38,000 dues-paying members to well over 52,000 members. That's unheard of in AFGE and still a record for AFGE. Now, as I said earlier, this was intentional and it was pointed. We set out every single day to do just that. And I can tell you something. Can I tell you something? Southerners recognize injustice as well as anybody. Southerners know that organizing to make your voice heard is the best and only way to make progressive change happen. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it isn't tough in the South, because it is. There are generations of people who have been fed lies about unions, and far too many people who can't tell the difference between truth and falsehoods. Of course, now, it's not just about what's true or what's not. Many Southerners look at what happened to unionized, industrialized jobs on the coast and in the Midwest, and they think that unions were to blame for all of that. Now, of course, just as many non-union industrialized jobs in the South went overseas, along with union jobs. But the line that union wages caused, the lies that union wages caused this, is a tough myth to crack. Now, my best advice after a career of organizing in the South is this. You got to talk to people one-on-one, get to know them, and then ask them to join the union. There's nothing like one-on-one, member-to-member organizing. Now, it sounds simple, but it's really hard to do. It's personal and it's labor intensive, and sometimes it's very time consuming. But I can promise you that workers in the South are open to the message of jobs with justice. That's a fact. Now, we're passionate defenders of freedom and justice, and we want justice from our employer, whether it's a private business or the federal, state, or local government. Now, I do think that this pandemic has opened many people's eyes about how much their employer values them. I think all of the talk about a business being a family has been shown to be a lie, and nothing but a lie, because you don't kick your family to the curb when there's a pandemic. And that's exactly what has happened in this administration. And because I believe that you hold that family close and dear to you. Okay? Now, non-union employers didn't have any kind of contract that forced them to continue health insurance, to provide sick leave, to take measures to guarantee a safe working condition. But union employers usually are required by contract to do all of that. Now, workers in the South can look around and see who can demand and obtain personal protective equipment, who can come forward and speak out about working conditions without fear of retaliation. Union workers can, not anyone else. We probably headed for a terrible recession, even when this pandemic is over, and the usual concern will be voiced about be happy you have a job in the first place. Don't risk it by rabble-rousing or union organizing. We need to resist this kind of thinking, and I'm hardened by the activism of workers, all the fast food restaurants and Amazon and warehouse workers and grocery store and nursing home. I'm sorry that it took a pandemic to show America the value, the courage, and the sacrifice of everyday hourly workers. Now, can we ever go back to a time when people think that starvation wages and no respect at work would be okay for the people who keep our grocery stores working? Can we ever go back to a time when people think that starvation wages and no respect at work is okay for nursing home staff, warehouse workers, and delivery workers, and others who kept us going during this crisis? It's our job to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now, in the South, Kroger paid an extra $2 an hour called hero differential to his workers for a couple of weeks. Now, they already cut it off. I guess they think it's a time limit on heroism. But once a hero is always a hero. Kroger can afford it, and their workers deserve it more than anyone else. But we all know that Kroger or any other employer won't pay an extra cent unless they have to. And we need to keep the pressure on. And solidarity is in full force to make sure that these workers' sacrifices have not been in vain. We have to keep the pressure on. My members in VA hospitals, at defense installations, at Social Security, OSHA, EPA, and the CDC all showed America how valuable that work is. And we won't let them forget about it. No, we can't do that. We won't let them treat us as disposable. Our union organizers in the South and elsewhere, by reminding people of what union solidarity does for them. On Capitol Hill, our union has worked to get extra sick leave, extra leave for care for family members, relaxation of workers' compensation rules, the right to teleworking, all things that wouldn't have been included if it wasn't for us. We have to show workers the value of getting together with their co-workers to speak with one voice, the power that creates the enormous benefit that come from exercising that power. I want to say thank you to all workers. Can I be real this evening? We're all prophets. And I want you to hear this. We're prophets of our time, as Dr. King was the prophet for his time. And we must raise our voices, and we must go down to the city hall. We must go down to the state house. We must go to the White House, and we must tell Pharaoh to let our people go. We are in this together, and we cannot be hoodwinked any longer. This is personal. It must become personal to all of us, because together we can bring about a change. Together we can change the landscape. Together we can do it. Labor and our coalition partners together. Labor and Morehouse, we can make this change. Labor and Job with Justice, we can make this change. We are in this together. We must lift up our voices. There is not much one voice can do, but when we combine all our voices together, 100 voices can make a great sound. But when you get 1,000 voices, when you get 10,000 voices, when you get 100,000 voices, you can make a change, and we must make this change. Thank you, and God bless all of you. This is my cry for today. Let's stand together in solidarity and in unity, and we can make a change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Kelly. We really needed that inspiration and uplift as we wrap up. And we've had this last 2 days where we've had the kind of a brief moment of reprieve from this pandemic to be able to see each other and be in relationship with each other. And now, of course, we're going to make the transition back into our complicated lives and our difficult scheduling. And we really needed a little motivation to help us get back into that. So thank you so much for that. And want to let everyone know that there's a slide up on your screen to support, to sign the petition that President Kelly just mentioned a second ago to tell Congress to protect government workers during this pandemic. Go to the website there, sign that petition, because there is no such thing as an expendable worker. So thank you to that. Thank you. I also want to make sure I give a big thank you to our panelists, to Banda for moderating the first half of that, and to Ursula, to Cynthia, Dr. Hewitt. We really appreciate all of you being on this, and everyone who participated in this giant experiment that was our first ever virtual conference. Just to share some final reflections as we wrap up. You know, it may seem weird now, but I used to feel like an imposter in the labor movement. And it's crazy looking at this panel where it's a black panel, it's a Southern panel. I feel so much at home here. This wasn't always the case. As a black woman from North Carolina who didn't really know what a union was outside of the Memphis sanitation strike until she got to college. You know, I'd been a part of social movements, and I witnessed my first union struggle as a teenager when my church boycotted Kmart in support of workers, mostly black women, who were facing discrimination and low pay. But I didn't know that was a union fight at the time, and that struggle wasn't reflected back to me when I sat in my first union meeting several years later in Maryland. And at that time, you know, in my job as a new organizer, I was relegated to mobilizing people who looked like me, while someone smarter, older, and whiter made decisions about strategy. So there were leadership opportunities, mind you, in people of color caucuses, in women-led spaces, or queer committees. But I was more than each of those things. And if I wanted to fight for justice and democracy for all people, why did I have to be stuck in just one of those silos? And then I found Jobs with Justice. And in my first J with J meeting, I saw myself reflected back to me, people from all walks of life, union and non-union, black and brown, queer and straight, rural and urban. Workers were not a silent presence, but a very active and vocal presence in developing strategy. and organizers came with their own authentic stories. We united under the same goal of seeking to expand organizing and collective bargaining power for everyone. And since that day, back in 2004, or maybe even 2001, if you count my participation as a leader from another organization, but that gives way too much insight on my real age. Since that day, I cherish every opportunity to be in a space with other Jobs for Justice leaders, thinkers, strategists, organizers. I never take it for granted, and I don't want you to either. Today, we are here to celebrate our past, to anticipate our future, and to stand strong on the sturdy bridge that connects us with both. Today, we celebrate an organization that has been a consistent hybrid between labor and social movements. How many times have you had to answer for someone? I mean, what is Jobs for Justice? What do you all do? I just can't wrap my hands around it. Have you had to respond to that? Hell, maybe it's a good thing because you can't really wrap your hands around fire, but it'll still burn your business down if you don't make a plan for it. While we're clear on who we are, what we do, and how we be, today we celebrate some of that Jobs for Justice mystique, that militancy, that clarity of vision, that insistence on being in relationship with people, even when they're a pain in our ass, so that we're prepared for the crisis before it comes. And what a crisis we have before us now. I know many of us have been feeling a lot of different crises on a daily basis since before this pandemic, constantly looking over our shoulders to make sure ICE or the police aren't trailing us after they've snatched up one of our neighbors, constantly worrying about our teenage and adult children who are self-medicating with narcotics and opioids just to get through the day, walking around with ever-present knowledge that just one trip to the emergency room could break our entire economic stability. Oh yeah, we know crisis. We've known crisis well long before this pandemic. But you know who's really feeling a crisis right now? Perhaps a crisis bigger than all of our troubles combined? Capitalism. Oh yeah, he's struggling. And yes, I gave him a gender. He's a big old gun-toting man. Capitalism is on all kinds of life support. He's got an IV connected to our wallets, just sucking up all the debts and wages and fees he can find. He's got an oxygen tank manufactured by white supremacy, sitting on the backs of all working people. He's got this mechanical respirator called patriarchy that keeps pumping him up with hot air, but he still keeps redlining. So all these corporate-backed elected leaders and government officials keep having to come in and jumpstart his heart with their tax dollars. Oh, it's a crisis of epic proportions for capitalism. But it's a tremendous opportunity for us, because while the powers that be are distracted trying to save a dying beast, we are birthing something new, something that prioritizes the health and well-being and dignity and happiness of many over the profits of the few. And you know what else? That they may not know it yet, but we're going to use capitalism's money to do it. Yes, we are. Because while they're telling us to keep quiet, working all these jobs, keep fighting over crumbs we give you while we deal with this more important problem over here, we're actually organizing, just like President Kelly said. We're coming together, and we're realizing that there's plenty of money that we made. There's plenty of money, it's ours, and it's time we take it back to build a society that works for all of us. And we're going to do it by organizing and forcing the shepherds of global capitalism to the table, at our jobs, at our homes, and in our communities. We're going to force them to the table to renegotiate all of these lopsided economic relationships we're in. And they'll come to the table because we pulled capitalism's IVs out of our wallets when we went out on strike. And we pulled off his oxygen tank when we realized that we benefited more from our shared self-interest with each other than from the promises, the false promises of white supremacy. And the patriarchy respirator just stopped. Honestly, she just walked away. She was done. When we accomplish this, they'll come to the table. And they won't be in the power seats either. You take nothing else from this virtual gathering. Remember that we have all of the power to stop production, the power to control our labor and skills in any given market, the power to kick people out of elected office or simply stop buying from companies who exploit us. We have all the power. It's ours to exercise. It's time to stop leaving it on the table. In that spirit, I want to call on everyone to take one final action from our conference. You know, every plenary has a call to action because we never get more than 10 people in a room without taking action. Millions and millions of people do not have a single dollar to pay towards housing during this global pandemic. And as we sit here strategizing together, private equity firms and billionaires are plotting to capture entire city blocks once eviction moratoriums end and working people are pushed to the street. We're not acting paranoid. We know this is going to happen. This is what they did in 2008. This is a part of the playbook. And we're not going to let it happen again. Not only must we cancel rent, but we must put equity's feet so that we are watching. Corporate landlords must have their part in the shared sacrifice we're all making during this pandemic. And that's why we're pressuring the top 41 private equity firms in the country to cancel rent now. So on your screen, you see another link, and I want everyone to follow that link. And I also want you to tweet at Equity Res and Mr. Sam Zell, $1 billion, I think he was 119 on the Forbes 400, billionaire who stands to make a lot of money from people who can't pay rent. And we want you to let him know we want to cancel rent. We want him and all of his corporate landlord cronies to cancel rent. So please follow that link. The last thing I want to say is, just like we don't pull 10 people together without doing an action, we also don't pull 10 people together without passing the hat. And just because we're online, we aren't going to not pass the hat. And so I want to make a pitch for everyone to give to the Worker Solidarity Fund, which was established to support local funds throughout the country that are providing immediate relief to those who may not be able to access unemployment and/or stimulus payments. Unlike other funds, the decision makers of this fund are workers, many who have joined us in the fight, some of whom you've actually heard from over the last couple of days. So please consider donating some or all of your stimulus check to this fund to support workers who really need it right now. Help them get on their feet so they can help us to kick the ass of the 1%. Last, as we wrap up, I want to just share a couple of thank yous. First to all of those who supported us and didn't pull back after the roller coaster of planning, canceling, and then planning a virtual conference. AFG in particular, thank you so much, President Kelly, for all of your support, and Ulico, both are co-hosts for this organization conference. I also want to thank SEIU, AFSCME, AFT, the Teamsters, the Workers Lab, actually talk through all the various scenarios before we cancel the conference. Thank you so much. I have to give a huge shout out, and I don't care if she blushes, even if she's gonna hide and not be on screen. I have to give a huge shout out to our communications director, Jessica Felix Romero, and her team, Joel and Nick, for pulling off one of the first ever virtual conferences in our movement with all the technological frustration that entailed. Then I have to just say that it's like one of the software applications we used for this literally turned Jessica into a parrot for an entire day. No lie, like she was on screen cursing as a parrot. I have no idea why, what technical glitch that came from, but she still was in meetings, negotiating things with us. It was worse than any virtual background we'd ever seen. Jessica, we're so lucky to have you on our team. I also want to take a moment to recognize a few people who put in over a year of work for what was going to be a large, an almost 1,000-person in-person conference in Atlanta that we had to cancel. And that includes Mackenzie Barris, our deputy director, who is still in negotiations with the Hyatt and the Atlanta Convention Center as we speak this week. She is one of those people who constantly takes it upon herself to lie awake at night thinking about things I still don't know. And maybe more importantly, a big thank you to her partner, Alexis, and her son, Angelo, for letting us take up so much of her brain space for the last few months. To Amy Smucha, who transitioned off our national staff almost 2 years ago, but she still hasn't been able to get away from us. Amy stepped in at a point when we really needed someone to just help us glue things together as a staff, and she actually had fun doing it, which is crazy, but we thank her for that. And to our consultants, Heidi and Tammy, who have been with us for almost 20 years of conferences. When I tell you these women are ride or die, I am not joking. They were ready to go up until the last second before we canceled. And then, of course, to Sarita Gupta, our previous executive director, who believed in me and our senior team. We wouldn't be here without you. And then last, to our national staff and the network leaders who put up with us. These guys pulled a national conference out of the sky when everything was saying we wouldn't be able to do it. Joel redesigned and redesigned again a website like overnight. Emily and Rachel rallied our registration contractors with military precision. Mina took us from having no workshops to strategic conversations led by many of you in what felt like a New York minute. I obviously cannot thank every one of you here, but I do want to make sure you're all recognized for what you've done. And needless to say, I can't do this without also thanking my own family. Amanda has taken on childcare and other domestic labor so that I could be holed up here in this room talking to you all And so for the last action of our conference, I definitely want to make sure that after you click out of this, you go over to the person that you're living with, your next family member, whoever it is for you, thank them, give them a hug, a high five, whatever it is that works in your household, for those who allowed you to be in this space with us today, who carried on the arduous task of daily life so that you could participate in these discussions. So thank you for accompanying us on this journey. We're so grateful to be in relationship with all of you. We may not have a banquet, but that won't stop us from celebrating. We got a couple of social options for you as you transition from the week into your weekend. You might consider, first and foremost, based on what Dr. Hewitt said earlier, the Advancing Black Strategists Initiative is having a happy hour. So calling all Black strategists, you're welcome to join an informal meeting to listen to music, talk, and discuss issues affecting Black folks in the labor movement and society at large. It will start as soon as we wrap up here, and there'll be a link on the screen to tell you how to get over to that. And then for everyone in the main room, there is a virtual DJ session. DJ Anzari will set us up, and we'll be doing a Facebook Live. And I just want you to, this is not a discussion. This isn't like, formalized, substantive conversation. This is an opportunity for you to dance. And yes, you can dance your ass off by yourself in your kitchen. You can dance in the living room with your kids, but we want you to, there really isn't, as they say, a revolution without some level of celebration in it, without a dance party. So we want you to be able to exercise all the worries and emotions that you've been experiencing both during this conference and during the pandemic in general, and enjoy some music with us. That's really how we want to come together, both in struggle as well as in celebration. So thank you everyone for joining us, and really enjoy the rest of your day.